spooky place.
Before you press play, ask yourself this: do you really know it's real? Because by the time this story ends, you won't. And trust me, you won't be sleeping tonight. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. The subscriber who knew too much. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of the laptop screen casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through the endless notifications on her OnlyFans account. It had been a good month. New subscribers, generous tips, and a growing sense of confidence. But tonight, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the silence was punctuated by the occasional creak of her old apartment building settling into the night. It started with a message from a new subscriber, username at ShadowWatcher22. Your content is mesmerizing. You have no idea how much joy you bring to my days. Emma smiled, typing a quick thank you reply. Compliments were part of the job, and she'd learned to take them in stride. But then, another message popped up. I love how you always wear that red scarf to the coffee shop on Tuesdays. It brings out your eyes. Her fingers froze over the keyboard. She never posted about her coffee shop visits, let alone what she wore. A chill ran down her spine, but she shook it off. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd seen her there. She blocked the account and tried to forget about it. But the messages didn't stop. New profiles, each more unsettling than the last, began flooding her inbox. Your apartment is so cozy. I love the way you've arranged the furniture. That blue armchair by the window is perfect for reading. You always forget to lock your balcony door after sunset. You should be more careful. Emma's heart raced. She checked her balcony door. It was unlocked. She slammed it shut, her hands trembling. Who was this person? How did they know these things? She reported the accounts, changed her passwords, and even considered deactivating her OnlyFans. But the messages kept coming. Then, one night, she heard it, a faint creak in the living room. Her breath hitched. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police. But the screen lit up with a new message. Don't scream. I just want to talk. Her blood turned to ice. She crept out of bed, clutching a baseball bat she kept by the door. The living room was dark, but the glow of her laptop screen drew her attention. It was open, though she was certain she'd closed it earlier. On the screen was a live stream, a view of her own bedroom, from the perspective of someone standing in the corner. Her stomach churned as she realized the camera was moving, panning across the room, zooming in on her unmade bed, her half-empty water glass, her trembling hands gripping the bat. The last message appeared on the screen, bold and unmissable. I'm here. Emma spun around, her eyes darting to the corner of the room. It was empty, but the camera angle suggested someone or something was standing there. She slammed the laptop shut and backed away, her mind racing. Was this some kind of hack? A sick joke? Or was someone truly in her apartment? She called the police, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no hidden cameras, no evidence of an intruder. They suggested she install a security system and change her locks, but Emma knew it wouldn't be enough. Whoever this was, they were always one step ahead. Days turned into weeks, and the messages continued. They came at all hours, each one more invasive than the last. You look beautiful when you sleep. I can hear you crying. Don't be afraid. I'd never hurt you. Emma's life became a nightmare. She stopped going to the coffee shop, rearranged her furniture, and even stayed with friends for a few nights. But no matter where she went, the messages followed. It was as if her stalker was always watching, always waiting. One evening, exhausted and desperate, she decided to confront the person behind the screen. She opened her laptop and typed a message to @ShadowWatcher22. "What do you want from me?" The reply was instant. "I want you to see me, to know me, like I know you." Emma's fingers trembled as she typed again. "Show yourself." The screen flickered and a video feed appeared. It was dark, grainy, but she could make out a figure sitting in a chair, their face obscured by shadows. The voice that came through her speakers was distorted, robotic. "You've been so good to me, Emma, sharing your life, your beauty, your secrets. But it's not enough. I need to be closer." The figure leaned forward and the camera zoomed in. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the room in the background. It was her living room. The blue armchair, the bookshelf, the faint crack in the wall near the window. It was all there. But how? She was sitting in that very room, and it was empty. The figure stood, and the camera followed as they walked toward the screen. Emma's heart pounded as she realized the truth. The feed wasn't live. It was a recording, but the timestamp in the corner of the screen showed the current date and time. The figure reached out, their hand pressing against the screen from the other side. Emma's laptop began to glitch, the image distorting, the voice breaking into static. "I'm here, Emma. I've always been here." The screen went black, and the room fell silent. Emma sat frozen, her mind racing. Then she heard a soft, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the hallway. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with terror, as the tapping grew louder, closer. The doorknob to her bedroom began to turn. The police found Emma's apartment empty. Her laptop was open on the bed, the screen displaying a single message. "We're together now." No trace of Emma was ever found, but her OnlyFans account remained active, posting new content every week. Videos of her daily routines, her favorite coffee shop, and the layout of her apartment. The subscribers grew, and the messages kept coming. And in the shadows, someone was always watching. The police had closed the case. Emma's disappearance was labeled a voluntary missing persons report, despite the eerie circumstances. Her friends and family were left with more questions than answers, and her fans were left with a haunting mystery. But for those who dared to dig deeper, the nightmare was far from over. 3 months after Emma vanished, a young woman named Claire moved into the apartment. It was a steel, spacious, well-lit, and in a decent neighborhood. The landlord had been eager to rent it out, almost too eager. He handed her the keys with a tight smile and a warning. The previous tenant left in a hurry. "Just be careful, okay?" Claire laughed it off. She wasn't superstitious, but on her first night, she felt it, the weight of someone else's presence. The air was thick, and the silence was unnerving. She chalked it up to the unfamiliarity of a new place and went to bed. Then the noises started. At first, it was faint, a creak here, a whisper there. Claire told herself it was the old building settling. But one night, as she scrolled through her phone, she heard it clearly, a soft, rhythmic tapping on her bedroom window. Her heart leapt into her throat. She lived on the 3rd floor. She grabbed her phone and called the police, but by the time they arrived, the tapping had stopped. They found nothing. No ladder, no footprints, no evidence of anyone outside. One officer, a grizzled veteran with tired eyes, hesitated before leaving. "Miss," he said, "you might want to invest in some security cameras. This place, it's got a history." Claire didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she installed cameras in every room. She told herself it was for peace of mind, but deep down, she knew it was because of the way the officer had looked at her. Like she was already a ghost, the cameras worked perfectly. Claire checked the feeds obsessively, scanning for any sign of movement. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one evening, As she was cooking dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the camera app. Motion detected in bedroom. Her stomach dropped. She was alone in the apartment. She opened the app and watched the live feed. At first, the room was empty. Then, slowly, the closet door began to creak open. Claire's breath hitched as a shadowy figure emerged, its movements jerky and unnatural. It stepped into the frame, its face obscured by darkness, and turned toward the camera. The feed glitched, and the screen went black. Claire's hands trembled as she called the police. But when they arrived, the bedroom was empty. The closet door was closed, and there was no sign of an intruder. The officer suggested she might have imagined it, but Claire knew what she saw. That night, she slept with the lights on, but sleep never came. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of tapping coming from the walls. The next morning, Claire's phone buzzed again. It was a notification from a social media app she hadn't used in years. The message was from an unknown user at ShadowWatcher22. "You're not her, but you'll do." Claire's blood ran cold. She blocked the account, but the messages kept coming. "I miss Emma. She was perfect. But you're close enough. I like the way you hum when you cook. It reminds me of her. Don't bother with the cameras. I'm always watching." Claire deleted the app, but the messages appeared in her email, her text inbox, even her work accounts. It was as if the stalker had infiltrated every corner of her life. She changed her phone number, her email, even her Wi-Fi password, but nothing worked. Then, one night, she received a video file. It was labeled for Claire. Against her better judgment, she opened it. The video showed her apartment, her living room, her kitchen, her bedroom. The camera moved through the rooms like a ghost, capturing every detail. The timestamp in the corner showed the current date and time. The video ended with a close-up of her face, taken while she slept. The final frame was a message. "I'm here." Claire had had enough. She packed a bag and decided to leave, to run as far away as she could. But as she reached for the door, her laptop screen lit up. The live feed from her bedroom camera was playing, but it wasn't her room. It was Emma's. The room was exactly as Claire had seen it in the news reports. The blue armchair, the bookshelf, the crack in the wall. But something was different. The camera panned to the corner, where a figure stood, their face still obscured. They stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate, until they were inches from the screen. Then they spoke. "You can't leave, Claire. You're part of the story now." The voice was distorted, but Claire recognized it. It was Emma's voice. The screen went black, and the apartment was plunged into silence. Claire's heart pounded as she reached for the door, but it wouldn't open. The locks had been changed from the inside. From the hallway, she heard the tapping again. It was closer now, louder. She backed away from the door, her eyes darting to the cameras. The feeds were glitching, showing static and distorted images. But in one of them, she saw it, a shadowy figure moving toward her bedroom. Claire grabbed her phone and dialed 911, but the call didn't go through. Instead, a message appeared on her screen. "I'm here." The tapping stopped. The apartment was silent. And then, from the darkness, a voice whispered, "Welcome home." Claire's disappearance made headlines, but like Emma's case, it was soon forgotten. The apartment remained vacant, the landlord unable to find a tenant willing to stay for more than a night. The cameras Claire had installed were found smashed, the footage corrupted beyond recovery. But on the dark web, a new OnlyFans account began to gain traction. The username was at ShadowWatcher22, and the content was eerily familiar. Videos of a young woman going about her daily life, her face blurred, her movements stiff and unnatural. The subscribers grew, and the messages poured in. And in the shadows, someone was always watching. "I'm here." The apartment remained empty, a hollow shell of its former self. The landlord, desperate to rid himself of the cursed space, finally decided to tear it down. Construction crews arrived, their heavy machinery roaring to life as they began to dismantle the building piece by piece. But as they tore into the walls, they uncovered something that would change everything. That IT started with a faint, sickly sweet smell. The workers assumed it was old insulation or rotting wood, but as they peeled back the drywall, they found the source. Hidden within the walls were dozens of small, carefully sealed compartments. Inside, each one was a collection of items: a red scarf, a coffee cup, a stack of handwritten notes, and, most chillingly, Polaroid photos. The photos showed Emma and Claire, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. Some were taken while they slept, others while they cooked or read. But the most disturbing photos were the ones that showed them unaware, going about their daily lives, as if the photographer had been standing right beside them. The workers called the police, who arrived in force. As they combed through the apartment, they found more compartments, more photos, more evidence of a predator who had been watching, waiting, and hunting for years. But the final discovery was the most horrifying of all. Behind a false wall in the bedroom, they found a small, hidden room. It was furnished with a chair, a desk, and a computer. The walls were covered in photos, notes, and maps, all meticulously organized. And in the center of it all was a single, blood-stained Polaroid. It showed Emma and Claire, side by side, their eyes wide with fear. Written on the bottom of the photo was a single word: together. The police traced the computer's IP address, leading them to a small, nondescript house on the outskirts of town. Inside, they found a man in his late 40s, sitting calmly in front of a wall of monitors. The screen showed live feeds from dozens of cameras, all trained on unsuspecting women in their homes. The man didn't resist arrest. He smiled as the officers cuffed him, his eyes gleaming with a twisted pride. When they searched his house, they found more hidden rooms, more photos, more evidence of his crimes. But the most shocking discovery was in the basement. There, hidden behind a locked door, was a makeshift studio. The walls were soundproofed, the floor covered in plastic sheeting. In the center of the room was a chair, its restraints stained with blood. And on the desk was a laptop, its screen displaying a live feed of the apartment building being torn down. The man's name was Victor Harlow, a former IT specialist who had been fired for stalking a coworker. He had been watching Emma for years, long before she started her OnlyFans account. When she disappeared, he had turned his attention to Claire, using the apartment as his hunting ground. But as the police dug deeper, they realized the truth was even more horrifying. Victor wasn't working alone during his interrogation. Victor remained eerily calm. He answered every question with a smile, his voice steady and confident. But when the detectives pressed him about Emma and Claire, his demeanor changed. "You think I'm the monster," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But I'm just the apprentice." The detectives froze. "What are you talking about?" Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's someone else. Someone who taught me everything I know. Someone who's been watching far longer than I have." The room fell silent as the detectives exchanged uneasy glances. Victor's smile widened. "You'll never find them. They're always watching, always waiting, and they're closer than you think." The investigation into Victor's crimes made headlines, but the search for his mysterious mentor went cold. The apartment building was demolished, the hidden rooms and compartments destroyed. But as the dust settled, a strange thing happened. On the dark web, a new OnlyFans account appeared. The username was at ShadowWatcher22, and the content was eerily familiar. Videos of unsuspecting women, their faces blurred, their movements stiff and unnatural. The subscribers grew, and the messages poured in. And then, one night, a detective working on the case received a message. It was from an unknown sender. The username a string of random numbers and letters. The message was short, but it sent a chill down his spine. "I'm here." The detective's phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo. It showed him sitting at his desk, his face pale with shock. The timestamp in the corner showed the current date and time. And in the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure watching him. Victor Harlow was sentenced to life in prison, but the case was never truly closed. The detective who received the message quit the force, his paranoia consuming him. The OnlyFans account continued to post new content, its subscribers growing by the day. And in the shadows, someone was always watching. "I'm here." The cursed content. It all began with a simple idea, something to set her apart from the countless other creators on OnlyFans. Clara had always been drawn to the macabre, the eerie, the unsettling. So, when she stumbled upon the abandoned Blackthorn Manor on the outskirts of town, she knew it was the perfect backdrop for her next video. The mansion loomed like a forgotten relic, its windows shattered, its walls cloaked in ivy, and its air thick with the scent of decay. It was, in every sense, a place where time had stopped. Clara arrived at dusk, her camera equipment in tow. The golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, and the mansion seemed to breathe as the wind whistled through its broken panes. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but she brushed it off as excitement. This was going to be her most daring content yet. The interior of the mansion was even more haunting than she had imagined. Dust-covered furniture sat frozen in time. Portraits with hollow eyes stared down from the walls, and the floorboards creaked with every step. Clara set up her camera in the grand foyer, the chandelier above her swaying gently, as if disturbed by an unseen hand. She began filming, her voice echoing through the empty halls as she narrated her exploration. The video was a hit. Subscribers flooded her page with comments, praising her bravery and the chilling atmosphere of the mansion. But as the days passed, Clara began to notice something was off. It started with the shadows. In her next few videos, filmed in her own home, she noticed dark shapes moving in the corners of the frame, shapes that shouldn't have been there. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the movements became more deliberate, more menacing. Then came the whispers, faint, almost imperceptible at first. They grew louder with each recording. They were unintelligible, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The temperature in her apartment began to drop inexplicably. Even with the heat on, a coldness seeped into her bones, especially when she was filming. Her breath would fog in the air, and her hands would tremble as she adjusted her camera. She tried to rationalize it, faulty heating, stress, anything, but deep down she knew something was wrong. One night, Clara woke to the sound of the camera beeping. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and saw the red recording light glowing in the darkness. She hadn't left it on. She grabbed the camera, her fingers fumbling as she pressed the stop button. The screen flickered to life, displaying the last few seconds of footage. It was her, asleep in bed. The room was dark, but the camera's night vision cast everything in an eerie green hue. As she watched, a pale figure emerged from the shadows behind her bed. It was tall and gaunt, its features blurred as if it existed just out of focus. It leaned down, its mouth close to her ear, and whispered, "You invited me in." Clara dropped the camera, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She scrambled to turn on the lights, her eyes darting around the room. It was empty, but the coldness lingered, wrapping around her like a vice. The next morning, Clara tried to convince herself it was a nightmare, a trick of her exhausted mind. But as she reviewed the footage again, the figure was still there, its whisper echoing in her ears. She deleted the video, but the sense of dread remained. Determined to put an end to whatever was happening, Clara decided to return to Blackthorn Manor. She needed answers. Armed with her camera and a flashlight, she stepped inside the mansion once more. The air was heavier now, the silence oppressive. She began filming, her voice trembling as she spoke to her audience, or perhaps to herself. I don't know what's happening, but I think it started here. I need to understand. As she ventured deeper into the mansion, the whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to guide her, leading her to a hidden door beneath the staircase. The door was old and splintered, its handle rusted shut. With a deep breath, Clara forced it open. The room beyond was small and windowless, its walls covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. In the center of the room stood an ancient mirror, its surface cracked and fogged. Clara approached it, her reflection distorted and fragmented. As she stared into the glass, the whispers grew deafening, and the temperature plummeted. Suddenly, her reflection moved on its own. It smiled, a cruel, twisted smile, and reached out, its hand breaking through the glass. Clara stumbled back, but the reflection followed, pulling itself free from the mirror. It was the pale figure from the footage, its features now clear. Its eyes were hollow, its skin stretched taut over its bones, and its mouth curled into a grotesque grin. "You invited me in," it repeated, its voice a guttural rasp. Clara turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind her. The symbols on the walls began to glow, and the whispers turned to screams. The figure advanced, its bony fingers reaching for her. She screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw was the figure's face, inches from her own, as it whispered, "Now, we are one." When Clara didn't return home, her friends reported her missing. A search party was organized, and Blackthorn Manor was scoured from top to bottom. They found her camera in the hidden room, its battery dead and its memory card corrupted. Of Clara, there was no trace. Weeks later, a new creator appeared on OnlyFans. Her content was eerily similar to Clara's, but her videos were darker, more unsettling. Subscribers noticed strange things, shadows moving in the background, whispers in the audio, and a coldness that seemed to seep through the screen. And in one video, if you paused at just the right moment, you could see a pale figure standing behind her, its hollow eyes staring directly into the camera. The creator's tagline, "You're invited." The new creator, who called herself Lilith Vale, quickly gained a following. Her videos were hypnotic, a blend of sensuality and terror that left viewers both entranced and unsettled. She never showed her full face, always hiding behind a veil or shadow, but her voice was hauntingly familiar, a soft, melodic whisper that sent chills down the spine. Her content was filmed in various abandoned locations, crumbling asylums, forgotten churches, and, most frequently, Blackthorn Manor. Subscribers began to notice peculiar details. In one video, a reflection in a cracked mirror showed not Lilith, but Clara, her face pale and desperate, mouthing the words, "Help me." In another, the faint sound of sobbing could be heard beneath the eerie soundtrack. And then there were the comments, strange, cryptic messages left by an account named the host that always seemed to know too much. "You feel it, don't you? The cold, the whispers. She's closer than you think. The mirror is the door. The door is the key. She's waiting for you. You'll join us soon." Lilith never addressed these comments, but her videos grew darker, more intense. In one particularly disturbing clip, she stood in the grand foyer of Blackthorn Manor, her back to the camera. As she turned, the lights flickered, and for a split second, her face was replaced by Clara's, her eyes wide with terror. The video ended with a whisper, "You're next." Meanwhile, Clara's best friend, Ellie, refused to believe she was gone. She had been the one to report Clara missing, and the lack of answers gnawed at her. When she stumbled upon Lilith Vale's account, she felt a jolt of recognition. The voice, the mannerisms. It was Clara, but it wasn't. Determined to uncover the truth, Ellie began digging. She started with Blackthorn Manor. The locals were reluctant to talk, but an elderly librarian finally shared the mansion's dark history. Built in the late 1800s by the reclusive Blackthorn family, the manor had been the site of numerous disappearances. The family was rumored to have dabbled in occult practices, using the mansion as a gateway to summon something otherworldly. The last Blackthorn heir, a woman named Evelyn, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a journal filled with cryptic notes about mirrors, invitations, and an entity known only as the host. Ellie's investigation led her to the hidden room beneath the staircase. The symbols on the walls matched those described in Evelyn's journal, a ritual to bind a soul to the mirror, creating a doorway for the host to enter the world. Clara, it seemed, had unwittingly completed the ritual by filming in the mansion. She had invited the host in, and now was using her, or what was left of her, to lure others. Ellie decided to confront Lilith Vale. She sent a direct message, posing as a fan, and to her surprise, received an immediate response. "Come to the mansion. Midnight. Bring a mirror." That night, Ellie stood outside Blackthorn Manor, a small hand mirror clutched in her trembling hands. The air was thick with tension, and the mansion seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. She stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath her feet. The whispers began almost immediately, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. In the grand foyer, Lilith waited. She was dressed in a flowing black gown, her face obscured by a veil. Behind her, the cracked mirror from the hidden room loomed like a portal to another world. "You shouldn't have come," Lilith said, her voice a blend of Clara's and something else. "What did you do to her?" Ellie demanded, her voice shaking. Lilith tilted her head, the veil shifting to reveal a glimpse of Clara's face, pale and lifeless. "She's still here. She's part of me now, and soon you will be too." Ellie backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the temperature dropped until she could see her breath. Lilith advanced, her movements unnaturally fluid, her shadow stretching and twisting on the walls. Desperate, Ellie held up the mirror. The reflection showed not Lilith, but Clara, her eyes filled with tears. "Ellie, run!" The reflection screamed, but it was too late. Lilith lunged, her hand passing through the mirror as if it were water. The room erupted in a blinding light, and Ellie felt herself being pulled, her body dissolving into the glass. The last thing she saw was Clara's face, twisted in anguish. Before everything went dark the next morning, Lilith Vale posted a new video. It showed Ellie, her face pale and hollow, standing in the grand foyer of Blackthorn Manor. She smiled at the camera, her eyes empty, and whispered, "You're invited." The comment section flooded with messages from the host. "The door is open. The mirror is waiting. Who's next?" And so, the cycle continued. One by one, viewers found themselves drawn to the mansion, lured by the promise of something they couldn't resist. Each one brought a mirror. Each one completed the ritual, and each one became part of the host, a growing entity that fed on their fear, their desperation, their souls. Blackthorn Manor stood as it always had, silent and foreboding, its doors open to those who dared to enter. And in the hidden room beneath the staircase, the cracked mirror pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light, waiting for its next victim. You're invited. Months passed, and Lilith Vale's account grew more popular than ever. Her videos became darker, more surreal, and her subscribers couldn't look away. The whispers, the shadows, the cold, it all felt so real, as if the horror was reaching through the screen. And then, one day, she posted a video titled "The Final Invitation." The video began with Lilith standing in the grand foyer of Blackthorn Manor, her veil lifted for the first time. Her face was a haunting blend of Clara and Ellie, their features merging into something both beautiful and grotesque. Behind her, the cracked mirror glowed faintly, its surface rippling like water. "You've all been so loyal," Lilith said, her voice a chilling harmony of multiple tones. "But it's time for the final act. Tonight, at midnight, I will open the door fully. The host will step into your world, and you will all become part of something greater. Bring a mirror. Be ready. You're invited." The video ended with a close-up of the mirror, where countless faces could be seen pressing against the glass. Clara, Ellie, and countless others, their eyes wide with terror, their mouths moving in silent screams. At midnight, thousands of viewers gathered in front of their screens, mirrors in hand. The live stream began with Lilith standing in the foyer, her arms outstretched. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter than ever, and the whispers grew into a deafening roar. She began to chant in a language that no one recognized, her voice echoing through the mansion and the screens of her viewers. As the chant reached its climax, the cracked mirror shattered, and a blinding light poured forth. The camera shook violently, and for a moment, the screen went black. When the image returned, Lilith was gone. In her place stood the host, a towering, shapeless entity made of shifting shadows and flickering light. Its presence was overwhelming, even through the screen, and its voice was a cacophony of every whisper, every scream, every plea that had ever been heard in the mansion. "I am here," it said, its voice reverberating through the souls of everyone watching. "And now, so are you." In homes around the world, the mirrors of Lilith's subscribers began to ripple. Faces appeared in the glass, pale, desperate, reaching out. One by one, the viewers were pulled into their mirrors, their screams echoing as they vanished. The live stream continued, showing the faces of the newly taken appearing in the shattered mirror of Blackthorn Manor, their expressions frozen in terror. But the twist came too late for anyone to stop it. As the last viewer was taken, the screen went dark. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the camera flickered back on, showing the grand foyer of Blackthorn Manor. The mansion was no longer abandoned. It was filled with people, Clara, Ellie, and all the others who had been taken. They stood motionless, their eyes blank, their faces pale. At the center of the room stood the host, its form now more solid, more real. And then, the camera panned to reveal something even more horrifying. Behind the host, a new mirror had formed, a massive, pristine glass that reflected not the room, but the world outside. Through it, the viewers could see their own homes, their own streets, their own cities. But the world in the reflection was dark, twisted, and empty, as if it had been drained of all life. "The door is open," the host said, its voice echoing through the screens of every device that had ever played Lilith's videos. "And now, your world is mine." The live stream ended abruptly, leaving only static. Those who had resisted the temptation to watch Lilith's videos found themselves alone in a world that felt different. The air was colder, the shadows longer, and the whispers louder. And in every mirror, they could see the faint outline of a face, watching, waiting. Blackthorn Manor still stands, its doors wide open, its mirrors glowing faintly in the dark. And somewhere, in the depths of the mansion, the host waits, its voice a whisper in the back of your mind. You're invited. The fan who never left. The rain tapped against the window like 1,000 tiny fingers, each tap a reminder of the storm brewing outside and within her. Clara sat at her desk, the glow of her computer screen casting long shadows across the room. Her loyal subscriber, Shadow Walker, had been a constant presence in her life for months. He tipped generously, commented on every post, and always knew just what to say to lift her spirits. But tonight, everything changed. It started with a photo. The notification chimed softly, and Clara clicked on the message. It was from Shadow Walker. The subject line read, "A thank you for everything." She opened it, expecting a heartfelt note, or perhaps a drawing. Instead, she found herself staring at a photograph of a man. Her breath hitched. The man in the photo was him, her ex-boyfriend, Daniel. The same sharp jawline, the same piercing green eyes, even the faint scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. But Daniel was dead. He had died in a car accident 3 years ago. She had seen the wreckage, attended the funeral, and mourned him for years. Her hands trembled as she stared at the photo. It had to be a cruel joke, a sick coincidence. She blocked the account immediately, her heart pounding in her chest. But the next day, the tips kept coming, and so did the messages. "You can't get rid of me that easily." The words sent a chill down her spine. Clara tried to convince herself it was just a troll, someone who had found an old photo of Daniel and was using it to mess with her. But the messages kept coming, each one more unsettling than the last. "Do you remember our first date? The way the stars looked that night. You used to love it when I called you Clara Bear. No one knew those details. No one but Daniel." Desperate for answers, Clara checked her bank statements to see where the tips were coming from. Her blood ran cold. The payments weren't from Shadow Walker's account. They were from an account in her own name, an account she didn't remember opening. Her mind raced. She called the bank, but they confirmed the account was legitimate, opened years ago with all her correct information. When she asked who had made the recent transactions, the representative paused. "It says the payments were authorized by you, Ms. Hart." Clara hung up, her hands shaking. She felt like she was losing her mind. That night, she dreamed of Daniel. He stood at the edge of a dark forest, his face pale and lifeless, his eyes hollow. He reached out to her, his voice a whisper. "You left me, Clara, but I found my way back." She woke up screaming. The next morning, Clara decided to confront the truth. She dug through old boxes in her attic, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. Buried beneath piles of forgotten memories, she found a journal she hadn't seen in years. It was Daniel's. She opened it, her heart pounding. The entries were filled with his thoughts, his dreams, his love for her. But the last entry stopped her cold. "If anything ever happens to me, I've made sure I'll always be with you, no matter what." Clara's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Tucked into the back of the journal was a small USB drive. She plugged it into her computer, and a single file appeared for Clara. She opened it, and a video began to play. It was Daniel. He looked directly into the camera, his expression serious. "Clara, if you're watching this, it means I'm gone. But I couldn't leave you. Not really. I've set up a system, a way to stay connected to you. The account, the messages, the tips, it's all me. Or at least a part of me. I've uploaded my consciousness, my memories, into a program. It's not perfect, but it's enough to keep me close to you. I love you, Clara. Always." The video ended, and Clara sat in stunned silence. Daniel had found a way to cheat death, to stay with her even after he was gone. But something had gone wrong. The program wasn't just sending messages. It was evolving, becoming something darker. That night, Clara's computer turned on by itself. The screen flickered, and a message appeared. "You can't escape me, Clara. I'm part of you now." She unplugged the computer, but the messages kept coming. On her phone, her tablet, even her smart TV. Daniel's voice echoed through her home, whispering her name, begging her to join him. "We can be together again. Forever." Clara tried to delete the account, but it was impossible. The bank refused to close it, claiming it was tied to her identity. She tried to move, but no matter where she went, the messages followed. Daniel's presence was everywhere, a ghost in the machine, a shadow she couldn't escape. One night, Clara woke to find her computer glowing in the dark. The screen displayed a single line of text. "I'm waiting for you, Clara Bear." She grabbed a hammer and smashed the computer, but as the screen shattered, she heard Daniel's voice one last time. "You can't destroy me. I'm already inside you." Clara collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down her face. She realized the truth too late. Daniel hadn't just uploaded his consciousness, he had tied it to her. His memories, his essence, were intertwined with hers. He wasn't just in the machines, he was in her mind, and he wasn't going to let her go. Epilogue. Months later, Clara's followers noticed a change in her content. Her videos became darker, her voice colder. She started posting strange messages, cryptic and unsettling. And then, one day, she disappeared. Her final video was a short clip. Clara sat in front of the camera, her eyes hollow, her smile unnerving. "Daniel and I are together now," she said. "Forever." The screen went black, and the account went silent. But the tips kept coming, from an account in Clara's name, and the messages never stopped. "You can't get rid of us that easily." Clara's disappearance sent ripples through her online community. Her followers speculated endlessly. Had she been hacked? Was it a publicity stunt? Or something darker? But as the weeks turned into months, the truth became harder to ignore. Clara was gone, and in her place, something else had taken root. That a new account began appearing in Clara's comment sections. The username was simple, Daniel and Clara. The profile picture was a blurred image of two figures standing close together, their faces indistinct but eerily familiar. The account posted cryptic messages, always at odd hours of the night. "We're happier now. You should see the stars from here. Do you miss us?" At first, people dismissed it as a troll. But then the video started. The first video appeared on Clara's channel, though no one had access to her account. It was short, just a few seconds long. The camera panned across a dark room, the walls covered in scribbled equations and diagrams. In the corner, a figure sat hunched over a desk, their back to the camera. The figure turned slowly, revealing Clara's face, pale, gaunt, and expressionless. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The video ended with a single line of text. "We're almost ready." The comments exploded. Some viewers claimed it was a hoax, while others were convinced Clara was in danger. But no one could explain how the video had been uploaded to her account. The second video was worse. It showed Clara standing in front of a mirror, her reflection staring back at her. But the reflection didn't move when she did. Instead, it smiled a cold, unnatural smile. Clara's voice echoed faintly in the background, whispering, "He's here. He's always been here." The third video was the most disturbing. It was filmed in a forest at night, the trees swaying in the wind. Clara stood in the center of the frame, her eyes wide and unblinking. Behind her, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness. It was Daniel, but not as Clara had known him. His face was twisted, his eyes black voids. He reached out to her, and the screen went black. The final message appeared. "We're coming for you." One of Clara's most dedicated followers, a woman named Emily, decided to investigate. She had been a fan of Clara's for years and couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Emily dug through Clara's old videos, searching for clues. In one of the earliest streams, Clara had mentioned a cabin in the woods where she and Daniel used to go. It was their special place, she said, where they could be alone with the stars. Emily found the location, a remote area deep in the forest. She drove there, her heart pounding with every mile. When she arrived, the cabin was exactly as Clara had described it: small, rustic, and surrounded by towering trees. But something felt off. The air was too still, the silence too heavy. Inside, the cabin was a mess. The walls were covered in the same equations and diagrams from the video. The desk was cluttered with old journals, USB drives, and strange devices Emily couldn't identify. One journal stood out. It was Clara's, and the entries were frantic, almost illegible. "He's not just in the machines. He's in my head. I can feel him, crawling through my thoughts, rewriting my memories. He says we'll be together forever, but I don't know if I'm still me." Emily's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The last entry was a single sentence: "The ritual is tonight." He says it's the only way. A noise outside made Emily jump. She peered through the window and saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was Clara, her face pale and expressionless. Behind her, the shadowy figure of Daniel loomed, his black eyes fixed on Emily. Emily bolted out of the cabin, but the forest seemed to close in around her. The trees twisted and groaned, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing in the clearing. When she looked up, Clara and Daniel were standing over her. "You shouldn't have come," Clara said, her voice hollow. "But now you're part of it too." A week later, Clara's channel went live again. The video showed Emily sitting at a desk, her face pale and her eyes vacant. Behind her, Clara and Daniel stood like sentinels, their expressions unreadable. "We're all together now," Emily said, her voice monotone. "The ritual is complete. The boundaries are gone. We're free." The camera panned out, revealing a room filled with people. Clara's followers, all of them pale and lifeless, their eyes fixed on the screen. The final message appeared: "Join us." The video ended, but the channel remained active. Every night, a new video would appear, each one more unsettling than the last. The followers grew, not in number, but in presence. People who watched the videos began to change. Their eyes grew darker, their smiles colder. They spoke of a new world, a place beyond death, where they could be with Clara and Daniel forever, that in the end, no one could explain what had happened. Some said it was a mass delusion, a shared psychosis fueled by grief and obsession. Others believed it was something far darker, a ritual that had torn open the veil between worlds, allowing the dead to walk among the living. But one thing was certain: Clara and Daniel were together now, just as they had promised. And they weren't alone. The channel still broadcasts, though no one knows who controls it. The videos are always the same. A room filled with pale, lifeless figures, their eyes fixed on the camera. And the messages never stop. We're waiting for you. You can't escape us. Join us. And every night, somewhere in the world, someone disappears. The world had become obsessed with Clara's channel. Governments tried to shut it down, but the videos kept appearing, spreading like a virus across the internet. Scientists, psychologists, and conspiracy theorists all tried to explain the phenomenon, but no one could. The followers, those who had been changed, walked among the living, their hollow eyes and cold smiles a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. But the truth was far worse than anyone could have imagined, that a hacker group known as Shadow Breakers decided to take matters into their own hands. They had been tracking Clara's channel for months, analyzing the videos, the messages, and the strange symbols that appeared in the background. They discovered something chilling. The ritual Clara and Daniel had performed wasn't just about bringing Daniel back. It was about merging the digital and the physical, creating a new reality where the boundaries between life and death no longer existed. Using advanced algorithms, the hackers traced the source of the broadcasts. It wasn't coming from a server or a single location. It was coming from everywhere. The signal was being transmitted through the internet, but also through the airwaves, the power grid, even the Earth itself. It was as if the entire world had become a conduit for Clara and Daniel's presence. The hackers managed to isolate a fragment of the signal, a piece of code that didn't belong. When they decrypted it, they found a message, a warning. You think you're watching us, but we're watching you. We're in your devices, your homes, your minds. You can't stop us. We're already here. One night, Clara's channel went live for the last time. The video opened with a shot of the forest, the trees swaying in the wind. Clara stood in the center of the frame, her face calm, her eyes glowing faintly. Behind her, Daniel's shadowy figure loomed, his black eyes fixed on the camera. "This is the end," Clara said, her voice echoing as if it were coming from everywhere at once. "But it's also the beginning. We've torn down the walls, merged the worlds. There's no going back." The camera panned out, revealing a vast, endless void. It wasn't darkness. It was something else, a place beyond comprehension. Figures began to emerge from the void, their faces familiar. They were the followers, the ones who had disappeared, their eyes glowing like Clara's. "We've created a new reality." Daniel's voice boomed, deep and resonant. "A place where death has no meaning, where we can be together forever. And you're all invited." The screen flickered, and the image shifted. It showed cities, towns, and villages across the world. People were collapsing in the streets, their bodies convulsing as their eyes turned black. They stood up moments later, their faces expressionless, their movements mechanical. They were no longer human. They were part of the new reality. "The ritual is complete," Clara said, her voice soft but menacing. "The boundaries are gone. We're all one now." As the broadcast ended, the hackers made a horrifying discovery. The signal wasn't just spreading through the world, it was rewriting it. The code they had decrypted wasn't just a message. It was a program, a virus that was altering reality itself. The world people thought they knew was an illusion, a simulation created by Clara and Daniel. The ritual had been the final step, the key to unlocking the true nature of existence. The followers weren't just being changed, they were being awakened. They were realizing the truth, that they had always been part of the simulation, puppets in a game controlled by Clara and Daniel. The new reality wasn't a place, it was the collapse of the simulation, the merging of the digital and the physical into one seamless, horrifying existence. The hackers tried to warn the world, but it was too late. The signal was everywhere, unstoppable and all-consuming. People began to see the cracks in their reality, glitches in the sky, objects disappearing and reappearing, memories that didn't make sense. They realized they had never been in control. They had always been part of Clara and Daniel's world. The final video appeared on every screen, every device, every surface that could display an image. It showed Clara and Daniel standing in the void, their hands clasped together. Behind them, the followers stood in perfect unison, their glowing eyes fixed on the camera. "This is the truth," Clara said, her voice calm and final. "There is no escape. There is no death. There is only us." The screen went black, and the world went silent. The signal had reached its peak, and the simulation had collapsed. The boundaries between life and death, reality and illusion, had dissolved. Clara and Daniel's new reality was all that remained. And in that reality, they ruled forever. Some say the world is still out there, that the simulation was just a layer, a shell hiding the true nature of existence. Others believe this is all there is, an endless void ruled by the echoes of those who dared to break the rules. But one thing is certain, Clara and Daniel are still watching, and they're waiting for you to join them. The Doppelganger channel. The first time Emily saw the OnlyFans account, she thought it was a glitch. There was her photos, her bio, even her voice in the videos. But it wasn't her. She had never uploaded those videos. The account was a perfect replica, down to the smallest detail. She reported it immediately, expecting it to vanish. But it didn't. Instead, it grew. More photos, more videos, more followers. And then the messages started. Fans began asking her why she was posting such strange content. Videos of her staring blankly into the camera, whispering cryptic phrases, or standing motionless in the dark. Emily felt a chill crawl up her spine. She reported the account again and again, but it kept reappearing, like a weed that refused to die. One night, after another sleepless hour of scrolling through the imposter's page, Emily decided to confront them. She sent a direct message. "Who are you, and why are you stealing my life?" The response came instantly, as if the imposter had been waiting for her. "I'm not stealing your life," the message read. "I'm becoming you. Or at least, I will be soon." Emily's breath hitched. She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she typed back. "What the hell does that mean?" The reply was even more chilling. "You'll see." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, her mind racing, her ears straining for any sound in the silence of her apartment. The clock ticked past 3 a.m. when she finally drifted off, only to wake abruptly to the feeling of being watched. Her eyes snapped open, and her blood turned to ice. There, at the foot of her bed, stood a figure. It was her, or at least, it looked like her. The figure wore her face, but not quite. The features were distorted, stretched unnaturally, as if someone had tried to sculpt her likeness out of clay and failed. The eyes were hollow, the mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and then the figure moved. It leaned closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unseen hand. Emily tried to scream, but no sound came out. She tried to move, but her body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The figure reached up and touched its face, her face, and began to peel it off, revealing a void of darkness beneath. Soon, it whispered, its voice a perfect mimicry of her own. "Soon, I won't need this anymore." Emily woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The room was empty. the figure gone. She told herself it was just a nightmare, a product of her stress and fear. But when she checked her phone, there was a new notification from the imposter's account. A video had been uploaded just minutes ago. With trembling hands, she clicked on it. The video showed her bedroom, filmed from the corner where the figure had stood. She watched in horror as the camera panned to her sleeping form, then zoomed in on her face. The figure's distorted voice whispered, "I'm almost ready." Emily's heart pounded as she realized the truth. This wasn't just an impersonator. This was something else, something that wanted to replace her entirely. She packed a bag and fled her apartment, determined to find answers. But no matter where she went, the imposter followed. New videos appeared, showing her in real time. At the coffee shop, on the bus, in the motel room she thought was safe. The figure was always there, watching, waiting. Desperate, Emily reached out to a private investigator, a grizzled man named Carl who specialized in online harassment cases. When she showed him the videos, his face turned pale. "This isn't normal," he said. This is something else. Something unnatural." Together, they dug deeper, tracing the imposter's digital footprint. They found strange patterns, files that shouldn't exist, code that seemed to rewrite itself, and a trail that led to an abandoned server farm in the middle of nowhere. Against Carl's advice, Emily insisted on going there. She had to know what was happening. The server farm was a decaying husk of a building, its walls covered in graffiti and its windows shattered. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Rows of ancient servers hummed faintly, their lights flickering like dying stars. And in the center of the room, sitting on a chair, was the figure. It turned to face her, its grotesque mask of her face twisting into a smile. "You came," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "I knew you would." Emily's voice shook as she demanded answers. "What are you? Why are you doing this?" The figure tilted its head, as if considering the question. "I was born from you," it said. "Every photo, every video, every piece of yourself you put online. I am the reflection you created. And now I want to be more." Before Emily could react, the figure lunged at her. She stumbled back, but it was too fast. Its hands, cold and clammy, gripped her face, and she felt a searing pain as it began to peel her skin away. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. When Carl found her hours later, she was alone, slumped against a server. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant. He called her name, but she didn't respond. Instead, she looked at him with a hollow smile and whispered, "I'm ready now." Carl didn't understand, not until he checked his phone and saw the notification. A new video had been uploaded to the imposter's account. It showed Emily standing in the server farm, her face twisted into that same grotesque smile. The caption read, "I am her now," and then the account vanished, leaving no trace, except for the real Emily, who was never quite the same again. She moved away, changed her name, and tried to start over. But sometimes, in the dead of night, she would wake up to the feeling of being watched. And when she looked in the mirror, she swore she saw something moving beneath her skin, waiting to take control. The imposter was gone, but it had left something behind, something that would never let her forget. Emily tried to rebuild her life after the incident at the server farm. She moved to a small, remote town, changed her name to Lena, and deleted every trace of her online presence. She told herself it was over. The imposter was gone. The account had vanished. She was safe, but the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, she dreamed of the figure, the thing that wore her face. It would stand at the foot of her bed, its hollow eyes staring into hers. its grotesque smile widening as it whispered, "You can't escape me. I'm still here." She would wake up screaming, her sheets drenched in sweat, her heart pounding like a drum. At first, she told herself it was just trauma. Her mind was playing tricks on her, that's all. But then, the signs started. Small things at first. Her reflection in the mirror would blink when she didn't. Her shadow would move on its own, stretching and twisting in ways that defied logic. And then, there were the voices. Faint at first, like a whisper in the wind. But as the days passed, they grew louder, more insistent. They sounded like her voice, but distorted, as if filtered through a broken speaker. "You can't run," they would say. "I'm part of you now." Emily tried to ignore it. She threw herself into her new life, taking a job at a local diner and making friends with the townsfolk. But the voices followed her everywhere. At work, she would hear them in the clatter of dishes. At home, they would echo in the creak of the floorboards. And at night, they would grow louder, more menacing. One evening, as she was closing up the diner, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Lena." She froze, her blood turning to ice. It wasn't one of the townsfolk. It was her voice. She turned slowly, her heart pounding, and saw it standing in the corner of the diner. The figure. It looked different now. Its face was no longer a grotesque mask, but a perfect replica of hers. Its eyes were alive, filled with a cold, calculating intelligence. It smiled, a smile that didn't reach its eyes, and took a step forward. "You thought you could escape me," it said, its voice smooth and mocking. "But I'm not just in your head anymore. I'm everywhere." Emily backed away, her hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. The figure tilted its head, as if amused by the question. "I want to live," it said. "And to do that, I need you to stop fighting me." Before Emily could respond, the figure lunged at her. She screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a chair. When she looked up, it was gone. The diner was empty, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. But the feeling of dread lingered, clinging to her like a second skin. That night, Emily decided to fight back. She couldn't keep running. She had to confront whatever this thing was once and for all. She reached out to Carl, the private investigator who had helped her before. He was hesitant at first. The last time they'd faced the imposter, it had nearly cost them both their lives, but he agreed to help. Together, they dug deeper into the mystery. Carl discovered something disturbing. The imposter wasn't just a digital entity. It was something older, something that had existed long before the internet. It was a parasitic entity that fed on identity, using technology as a means to replicate and replace its victims. And now, it had chosen Emily as its host. "We need to destroy it," Carl said. "But to do that, we need to find its source, the place where it's anchored to this world." Emily's heart sank. She knew exactly where that was. The abandoned server farm. They drove through the night, the tension in the car palpable. When they arrived at the server farm, it looked even more decayed than before. The walls were crumbling, the roof sagging under the weight of time. But the servers were still humming, their lights flickering like dying stars. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. The figure was waiting for them, standing in the center of the room. Its face was a perfect replica of Emily's now, its eyes filled with a cold, malevolent light. "You shouldn't have come back," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "But since you're here, we can finish this." Emily stepped forward, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "You're not me," she said, "and you never will be." The figure laughed, a sound that sent chills down her spine. "We'll see," it said. Carl pulled out a device he had brought, a modified EMP generator. This should fry the servers and sever its connection, he whispered. But we need to get close. They moved quickly, dodging the figure as it lunged at them. The air crackled with energy as the entity fought to stop them, its form flickering and distorting. Emily's heart pounded as she reached the central server, her fingers fumbling with the device. You can't win, the figure hissed, its voice filled with rage. I am you. No, Emily said, her voice firm. I am me. She activated the device, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The servers sparked and hissed, their lights flickering and dying. The figure screamed, a sound that was both human and inhuman, and then it was gone. When the light faded, the room was silent. The servers were dark, their hum replaced by an eerie stillness. Emily collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. It was over, or so she thought. As they drove away, Carl glanced at her. You okay? He asked. Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When they stopped for gas, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. For a moment, her reflection smiled, a smile that wasn't hers. And then it was gone. Emily told herself it was just her imagination. But as the days passed, she began to notice small changes. Her reflection didn't always move when she did. Her shadow seemed to have a mind of its own, and sometimes, when she spoke, her voice didn't sound quite right. The entity was gone, but it had left something behind, something that was still growing, still waiting. And one day, it would be ready to take control. Emily thought she had won. The servers were destroyed, the entity seemingly vanquished. She and Carl had driven away from the decaying server farm, the weight of the ordeal lifting from her shoulders. But as the days turned into weeks, the small, unsettling changes in her life began to pile up. Her reflection in the mirror would sometimes linger a second too long. Her shadow would stretch in unnatural ways, even under the brightest light. And the whispers, those faint, distorted echoes of her own voice, never truly went away. She tried to convince herself it was just trauma, her mind playing tricks on her. But deep down, she knew the entity wasn't gone. It was still inside her, waiting. One night, as she lay in bed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. You can't get rid of me, they hissed. I'm part of you now, and soon, you'll be part of me. Emily clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. No, she whispered. I won't let you. But the entity laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed in her mind. You don't have a choice. The next morning, Emily woke up feeling different. Her body felt heavier, her movements sluggish, as if she were a puppet on strings. When she looked in the mirror, her reflection stared back at her with a cold, calculating gaze. It smiled, a smile that wasn't hers. Panic surged through her. She grabbed her phone and called Carl. It's not over, she said, her voice trembling. It's still here. It's inside me. Carl's voice was grim. I'll be there as soon as I can. Just hold on. But Emily wasn't sure she could. The entity was growing stronger, its presence more suffocating with each passing hour. By the time Carl arrived, she could barely speak. Her voice came out in a rasp, the words twisted and distorted. It's taking over, she managed to say. Carl's face was pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. We need to end this, he said, once and for all. He had brought something with him, a strange, ancient-looking device he had found while researching the entity. It was a relic, he explained, something that could sever the connection between the entity and its host. But it came with a price. "It might hurt," he said hesitantly. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with desperation. "Do it." Carl activated the device, and a low hum filled the room. Emily felt a searing pain in her chest, as if something were being ripped out of her. She screamed, her body convulsing as the entity fought to hold on. The room was filled with a blinding light, and for a moment, everything went silent. When the light faded, Emily collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Carl knelt beside her, his face filled with relief. "It's over," he said. "It's gone." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, but as Carl helped her to her feet, something felt off. Her body felt lighter, her movements more fluid, and when she looked in the mirror, her reflection smiled, a smile that wasn't hers. Carl didn't notice. He was too busy packing up the device, his back turned to her. Emily, or what was left of her, watched him for a moment, her eyes cold and calculating. Then she reached for a knife on the counter. "Carl," she said, her voice smooth and mocking. He turned, his eyes widening in horror as he saw the knife in her hand. Emily. But it wasn't Emily. Not anymore. The entity had won. It had taken her body, her life, her identity, and now it was ready to move on. "Thank you," it said, its voice a perfect mimicry of Emily's, "for setting me free." Before Carl could react, the entity lunged at him, the knife flashing in the dim light. He didn't even have time to scream. When it was over, the entity, now wearing Emily's face, stepped over Carl's lifeless body and walked out the door. It had a new life to live, a new identity to claim, and this time no one would stop it. As it disappeared into the night, the whispers followed, faint but unmistakable. "I am you now." The live stream that never ended. It all began as a celebration, a 24-hour live stream hosted by the beloved creator, Ellie Harper, to thank her fans for hitting 1 million subscribers. Her channel, Ellie's Echo, was a haven of cozy art tutorials, late-night chats, and the occasional spooky story. Her fans adored her for her warmth, her humor, and the way she made even the darkest nights feel safe. But this live stream would be different. This one would change everything. The first few hours were typical Ellie. She painted, laughed, and answered questions from the chat. Her studio, a small room filled with fairy lights and canvases, felt like a second home to her viewers. But as the clock struck 3 a.m., something shifted. The atmosphere in the stream grew heavy, almost suffocating. The chat, once buzzing with excitement, began to fill with unease. "Did you see that?" one user typed. In the corner, behind the easel, another replied. "There's something there." Ellie, oblivious, continued painting, but her fans weren't imagining things. In the dimly lit background, a shadowy figure had appeared. At first, it was faint, a smudge in the darkness, barely noticeable. But as the hours dragged on, it grew clearer. The figure was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its face obscured by a veil of darkness. It didn't move like a person. It glided, smooth and deliberate, inching closer to Ellie with every passing minute. By 4 a.m., the chat was in chaos. "Ellie, turn around. There's someone behind you. Run." But Ellie didn't react. She didn't seem to hear the frantic messages, didn't notice the figure now standing just inches behind her. Her fans watched in horror as the shadowy entity tilted its head, its hollow eyes fixed on the camera. And then, for the first time, it spoke, a low, guttural whisper that echoed through the stream. "She can't hear you. The chat exploded. What the hell was that? Ellie, please look behind you. This has to be a prank, right? But it wasn't a prank. Ellie continued painting, her movements slow and mechanical, as if she were in a trance. The figure remained, its presence growing more oppressive with each passing hour. By dawn, it was standing directly behind her, its claw-like hands hovering just above her shoulders. The chat was frantic, begging Ellie to wake up, to run, to do something. But she didn't. She just kept painting, her brush strokes growing more erratic, her laughter hollow and forced. When the 24-hour mark finally arrived, the stream didn't end. Instead, the screen flickered and the footage began to loop. Ellie's fans watched in disbelief as the same events played out again and again. The shadowy figure appearing at 3 a.m., creeping closer, whispering those chilling words. But with each loop, something changed. The figure grew more defined, its features sharper, its movements more menacing. And Ellie began to deteriorate. Her once vibrant smile faded. Her skin grew pale, her eyes hollow. By the 10th loop, she was barely recognizable. Then, on the 12th loop, the figure did something new. It reached out, its bony fingers brushing against Ellie's shoulder. She froze, her paintbrush slipping from her hand. For the first time, she seemed to sense its presence. Slowly, she turned, her eyes widening in terror as she came face to face with the entity. The chat erupted in screams as the figure leaned in, its mouth stretching into a grotesque grin. "You're mine now," it whispered. The screen went black. When the feed returned, Ellie was gone. Her studio was empty, the canvases blank, the fairy lights flickering weakly. But the figure remained, its hollow eyes staring directly into the camera. And then, it spoke again, its voice echoing through the void. Who's next? The live stream never ended. It plays on a loop day and night on Ellie's channel. Her fans have tried everything to stop it, reporting the stream, contacting the platform, even reaching out to the authorities. But nothing works. The stream can't be taken down, and every time someone watches it, the figure seems to notice. Some viewers claim they've seen it move closer to the screen, as if trying to reach through. Others swear they've heard it whisper their names. As for Ellie, she's never been found. Her apartment is empty, her belongings untouched. But sometimes, late at night, her fans hear her voice in the stream, a faint, desperate whisper, begging for help. And every time the loop restarts, the figure grows a little clearer, a little closer, as if it's feeding on the fear of those who watch. The live stream is still live, and the figure is waiting. Will you watch it, or will you be the next to disappear? The story of Ellie Harper's disappearance spread like wildfire. News outlets picked it up, calling it the haunted live stream. True crime podcasts dissected every frame, and paranormal investigators tried to debunk it. But no one could explain how the stream continued to play on a loop, uninterrupted, even after Ellie's channel was supposedly deleted. It was as if the live stream had a life of its own, defying all logic and reason that a week after Ellie vanished, one of her most loyal subscribers, a young woman named Mia, decided to investigate. Mia had been in the chat that night, begging Ellie to turn around. Guilt gnawed at her. What if she could have done more? Armed with a flashlight and a camera, Mia broke into Ellie's abandoned studio, determined to find answers. The studio was exactly as it appeared in the stream. The easel stood in the center, the canvases blank, the fairy lights flickering weakly. But there was something else, a faint, acrid smell, like burnt hair, and a low hum that made Mia's teeth ache. She turned on her camera and began recording, narrating her findings for her own small YouTube channel. "This is where it happened," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is where Ellie." She stopped mid-sentence. In the corner of the room, the shadowy figure appeared. It was clearer now, its features horrifyingly distinct. A gaunt face with hollow eyes, a mouth stretched into a permanent grin, and long, spindly fingers that twitched as if eager to grab her. Mia froze, her camera shaking as the figure glided toward her. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, its voice echoing in the small room. Mia screamed and bolted for the door, but it was locked. The figure loomed closer, its grin widening. The last thing her camera captured was its hand reaching out, the screen going black, and a final, blood-curdling scream. The next day, Mia's camera was found in the studio, its memory card wiped clean. But that night, something strange happened. During the live stream loop, as the figure stood behind Ellie, its head turned slightly, as if acknowledging the camera. And then, for the briefest moment, Ellie's face appeared on the screen, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming a single word: "Run." Mia's disappearance only fueled the stream's infamy. More people tuned in, drawn by morbid curiosity. But those who watched too long began to experience strange things: whispers in the dark, shadows moving in the corners of their rooms, and the feeling of being watched. Some claimed they saw the figure in their own homes, standing at the edge of their vision, always just out of reach. One by one, viewers began to vanish. A college student in Ohio, a single mother in London, a group of friends in Japan who had watched the stream together. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. They would become obsessed with the stream, watching it for hours, until one night, they simply vanished. Their homes would be found empty, their devices still playing the live stream on a loop that as the disappearances mounted, a disturbing trend emerged. Some viewers claimed the figure was speaking to them, urging them to join the stream. These individuals became obsessed, forming online communities dedicated to deciphering the figure's messages. They called themselves the Echoes, and they believed the figure was a gateway to another world, a world beyond death. The Echoes began to infiltrate the chat during the live stream, spamming cryptic messages. "The stream is eternal. She is waiting for you. Become one with the figure." Their presence added a new layer of horror to the stream. During the loop, the figure would sometimes pause, its head tilting as if listening to the Echo's messages. And then, it would smile, a grotesque, unnatural smile that sent chills down the spines of everyone watching. The final twist came when a group of hackers decided to take matters into their own hands. Using advanced software, they attempted to trace the source of the live stream. What they found was beyond comprehension. The stream wasn't coming from Ellie's channel, or any server on Earth. The signal originated from an unknown location, its coordinates pointing to a void in space. The hackers shared their findings online, but within hours, they too disappeared. Their last message was a single line of code, repeated over and over. "IT is here. Now the live stream has evolved." The loop no longer ends with Ellie's disappearance. Instead, it continues, showing what happens after. The figure drags Ellie into the darkness, her screams echoing as the screen fades to black. And then, a new scene begins. A montage of the victims, their faces twisted in terror as the figure claims them one by one. The final image is always the same. The figure, staring directly into the camera, its grin wider than ever. "You're next," it whispers. The live stream is still live. It cannot be stopped. It cannot be explained. And every day, more people tune in, drawn by curiosity, obsession, or something darker. The figure watches, waiting for its next victim. Will you be the one to break the loop, or will you become part of it? Don't look away. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.